एक मैच गेम नॉन झूठी देखने बाकी इसके साथ कनाडा हो गई फिर नीदरलैंड्स हो गई ऐसे टीम ये सब है ऑस्ट्रेलिया इंग्लैंड ये सब न्यूजीलैंड चार हो गए हमारी ग्रुप में सब नल्ले पड़े अभी सारी ग्रुप में से दो अच्छी टीम और ग्रुप में से देखिए टीम क्वालिफाई है जो टॉप रहेगी ना इंडिया तो पहले इंडिया वाली पहले पाप हो जाएगा हो जाएगा भाई क्या केरला नीदरलैंड से हारे तो नहीं हमें इंडिया को जीता पाकिस्तान का मैच हारे और पाकिस्तान भाई इधर तो हारा पाकिस्तान क्वालीफाई हो जाएगा नहीं ऐसे कैसे पाकिस्तान को जीत लेगा भाई पाकिस्तान क्वालीफाई रेटिंग है हर साल कोई नहीं चलता तो बस ना भाई वही साल पे कोहली के भाई वही साल ही बहुत बार उसने बाकी बार भी हम बाकी से हम कर सकते हैं हारने वाली मैच नहीं देखा वो वाली एकदम हार ही चुके थे इंडिया का मैच होता है विनर चांस 2 हां पता याद मत दिला बहुत देख लिए मैंने कोहली हां क्योंकि भाई देखा है मेरे पूरा 1000 बार देखा फाइनल जाके डोंट रिकमेंड नहीं कर दिया और इस पर टाइमिंग लेट है अरे मगर वहां पे वैसे भी टेरर अटैक में सेट नहीं है हां वो पता है अच्छा इंडिया में मजा है हां भाई मजा ही मैंने तो पार्टी करी थी भाई इंडिया पे भाई सब अच्छा कुछ बोल रहे रुक जा एक सेकंड भाई ने थोड़ा गलत बोला टैब रिप्लेस ऋतुराज गायकवाड़ ने टैब रिप्लेस में हार्दिक पांड्या ने आता है पांड्या को तो खेला है भिड़े होके निकला है पांड्या की कोई जगह और ये कंट्रोल हमारे हाल में जो तुम्हारे आउट हो जाता है तो तुम हार ही चुके थे भाई इंडिया के 3 अबे मुंबई इंडियंस अरे पहले तो आयो है पहले तो आयो है elementary के नाम मैंने नहीं बनाया कंट्रोल सी उधर से किया, कंट्रोल भी इधर मार दिया। पिछले एग्जाम में हम भी तो हिस्ट्री में हम तीनों यस हां तुम जाओ सॉरी ऐसे ना मिल रहा ठीक है भाई बैठा ही नहीं बैठा नहीं बैठा ना हिस्ट्री विवाद भाई इन्होंने दिखा दी हम दोनों पढ़ के तुम रुको तुमने हिस्ट्री अगर पढ़ के आए तो बैठे ठीक है हां भाई क्या होगा हां ठीक है अगला पार्ट है ओए 1225 12 तेरा आया बोला ये मेरे को तेरा इसके बाद अरे मैंने एमसीक्यू कर मैंने भी तो एमसीक्यू कर सेकंड वाला यार वो ग्राफ वाला तो सब कर है ये 15 मेरा भाई किसे अमृता वाले भाई अबे ये वाली इसको इतना भी बता हां फट गई फट गई नहीं हो इसके फाइल अच्छा उसको अच्छा तो डायरेक्ट नंबर है भाई गोट है भाई गोट गोट है भाई गोटी बोल रहा है सही है तू बिंदास I mean, bro. No doubt. ये बच्चा है ये बोलता है वो 15 ये बच्चा है अबे आने वाले को आया है आने वाले को आया अरे इन्होंने पढ़ लिया इसको ये तुम्हारे टॉपर पे जाता है कैसे भी ऐसे कॉपी पेस्ट कर दिया है मैं तो इसके साथ इसने जब पता चार बार आंसर नहीं बताया मेरे को लगा टॉपर इससे मेरा मतलब मेरी वाले सवाल का तो क्या फाइनल एग्जाम में yes
टॉपर की बच्चे थे सबसे
Why math now? Homework.
He was doing the homework. I was supporting.
Oh, what did we finish? We finished with respiration. Respiration we haven't started. Nutrition we are already done with all the steps, the processes, right? So, did you go through? Did you go through the process of nutrition, the enzymes, the concept of photosynthesis? You see, no time. किसी ने पढ़ाई नहीं की? You also? हाँ, very good. जो मई मंथ में पढ़ेगा उसको 95 प्लस जरूर मिलेगा. जो मई मंथ में all busy in trips and tours, not problem. It will be a big problem later. Let me take a short recap of what we have done. 5 questions. Take a fresh page of your notebook. Try answering these 5 questions. Number 1. Today we are going to learn the next part of the chapter, respiration. Before that, first question, number 1. Name the cells. You close your volume. Try answering absolutely on your own. Name the cells that form the stomatal apparatus. Name the cells that form the stomatal apparatus. Name the cells that form the stomatal apparatus. Number 2. What is chlorophyll? State its function. What is chlorophyll? State its function. What is chlorophyll? State its function. Number 3. Name the enzyme. You may leave 2 lines gap to fill in the answers later. What is chlorophyll? State its function. 3 lines you would need. Go to the third question. Name the enzyme. Name the enzyme that brings about, or name the enzyme that carries out the digestion of. Name the enzyme that carries out the digestion of partially digested proteins. Name the enzyme that carries out the digestion of partially digested proteins. In the duodenum. Partially digested proteins in the duodenum. Next is number 4. Number 4. What is the composition of? What is the composition of gastric juice? That's number 4. Number 5. Composition of gastric juice is just 3 words to write. Next, write the overall equation of photosynthesis. Write down the overall equation of photosynthesis. Full stop. Next part of the same question. Why is starch tested in plants with the help of iodine solution? With the help of iodine solution and not glucose. Why is starch tested with the help of iodine solution and not glucose? So complete now. I'll give you 5 minutes to complete the answers. If you know the answers, it will take just 5 minutes to answer them. Number 1 done. DPS students are here. You are from DPS, no? Who is from DPS here? Any DPS students here? You are from which school? Kodar, how many here? 1, 2, 3. Done? Number 1 done for all of you? You try answering whatever you can on your own. Out of 5 questions, if 3 also you are able to understand and write on your own, quite good. Make it fast. No, not at all. When you ask and write, see and write, copy and write, that makes no use. And I'll not give you this type of assessments at all. Right. Should we discuss the answers? Make it fast. Keep reading small parts of the chapter. So as I give you almost every day, I will give you every lecture. Now I'll give you this, right? Because already we have finished a part of the chapter. Once I finish with respiration, you'll be given the date for the first test also here. So every test, every example, exam in your school, set a target for yourself, set a benchmark for yourself that this much mark I should get, and that's how you keep on developing. You keep on, moving towards your goal. So not just exam is there. I'll prepare whatever I can. I will write. No, whatever I can, what I know, I'll write. That is not happening now. I have to write all correct. That should be the attitude now. Okay. Come on, done?
Yes.
Done? So let's start answering. Check your answers. If you have missed out writing any definite word, definite point, you will have to write it down on your own and assess yourself. Let us start. Say, tell me the first answer. What is it?
Guard cells.
Guard cells. The cells of the stomatal apparatus we write as guard cells. Nothing else. In the diagram, we have marked subsidiary cells also and epidermal cells also, but that we will not write here. We will only write guard cells. Send to the next.
What is chlorophyll? Chlorophyll is a big kind of
These are very good. Usually,
formation of sun.
what is chlorophyll? Chlorophyll is a green colored photosynthetic pigment. Use that word. Chlorophyll is a green colored photosynthetic pigment. What is its function? Function is to trap sunlight or solar energy. Either of the answer is right. Third, last line, girls. Third, enzyme which brings about partially digested proteins in the duodenum, I had asked you. What is it? Next. What is it? Pepsinogen. Previous bench. That's why I'm asking now. He's trying to hide her face. Ah, bolo. What is it? You know that one? Enzyme, partially digested enzyme. The enzyme which brings about partially digested proteins in the duodenum. What is that? Okay, not a problem. We'll come to you again. Next. Last corner there. No. Trypsin. Trypsin. Remember, we talk about pepsinogen. That is number one, not an active form of the enzyme. So as it is, we cannot write pepsinogen for any of the answers. But can we write pepsin? No, pepsin does its job where? In the stomach. Pepsin does its job in the stomach. And now for duodenum that I mentioned, or the upper part of the small intestine that you get, you should always write enzyme of the pancreatic juice. That should come, no? Enzyme of the pancreatic juice. And which is that enzyme? Trypsin is the enzyme. Come to the fourth answer there. Composition of gastric juice.
Hydrochloric acid.
Pepsin. Pepsin, hydrochloric acid, mucus. Next, the last answer.
Photosynthesis equation. 6CO2 plus 12H2O, 8 sunlight and
Yes.
Chlorophyll.
In the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll.
C6H12O6 plus 6CO2 plus 12H2O.
6H2. 12H2O on the left hand side, 6H2O on the right hand side. 6 carbon dioxide on the left hand side and 6 molecules of oxygen on the right hand side. Did you all get your equation correct? No? What is the mistake you made? You did not. Write it down. So what is that? On the left hand side, what do we write? What are the reactants? 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 12 molecules of water. Now we put the arrow, and then above the arrow, what do we write? Chlorophyll, and below sunlight, any of the options. Now what are the products? The primary product is glucose. And then 6 molecules of oxygen, 6 molecules of water, not 12 molecules. 6 molecules of water. The last answer there? Second line, yes. Your names. The attendance sheet is gone. Yes. If it is a test of iodine, remember we have studied the starch test.
Yes.
Why can't we test for glucose? We have never studied glucose test as such in a plant. In a leaf, we always talk about starch test. Why?
And how we will test glucose with glucose?
No, it's a carbohydrate in
Yes.
itself.
How we will test glucose with glucose?
Yes, glucose with glucose.
I mean, final product of glucose.
So that is the question. फोटोसिंथेसिस तो ग्लूकोज बना रहा है in the leaf, but जब हम आयोडीन के साथ टेस्ट करते हैं, we are always testing starch. Why not glucose? Because it readily gets converted. बहुत जल्दी the glucose gets converted into some other forms. So plant cells में glucose test करना बहुत difficult है because the glucose gets converted to some other forms and stored in the form of starch. We'll write that answer properly right now. Photosynthesis produces glucose as the primary end product. Glucose as the primary end product, which immediately gets converted into other forms such as sucrose and stored in the form of starch. So that means, got the answer all of you? And stored in the form of starch. So that means in the plant cell, starch is always there. So it's easy to test starch in the plants. Keep reading this. In the next class, again, I will give you certain questions. You have to keep practicing a lot of questions. Today we are going to start with respiration. What do you know about respiration? What is respiration?
The breaking down.
The methods of how to produce energy.
Breaking down of
Food to produce energy.
Oxygen to produce energy.
to produce energy. But now what is the relation when we are talking about the process of digestion over? In the process of digestion, in the process of absorption, what did we study? We are now talking about the villi. Do you remember about the villi still? We talk about the villi. What has happened? In the villi, we had already come across that the villi had what? A network of blood vessels were there. A network of blood vessels were there. Now, this blood vessels and surrounding the villi, what are those molecules we had already come across? What is the simplest form of protein digestion?
Amino acids.
Amino acids. Simplest form of carbohydrate digestion. Simplest form of carbohydrate digestion is glucose. Simplest form of fats,
Fatty acid and
fatty
glycerol.
acids and glycerol. Now, say suppose I talk about that. These are the molecules on the outer wall of the villi. What did we learn? If it is absorption, then what is happening? If it is absorption, that these molecules are directly getting diffused into the blood. What is the meaning? Here the molecules are. Here the molecules meaning I am talking about on the outer wall of the villus. The concentration of these molecules are much more. So these molecules are directly entering into the bloodstream because the concentration is less here. So this process is happening. So already we had studied this. Now these molecules are in the bloodstream. What now next? This bloodstream, as it moves, what is it carrying? It is carrying a whole lot of these molecules. What is that process we are already talked about? Assimilation. This is absorption. And now that the nutrients have been carried and deposited to the body cells, now these blood vessels are very much running in contact with the body cells also, the tissues also. So now next what? These molecules will now start getting diffused into the blood cells. So that's the next part. I'm talking about absorption, I'm talking about assimilation. But after the molecules have already entered into the body cells, now next what? These glucose molecules which have already entered into the body cells now need to be broken down. These molecules which have already entered into the body cells now need to be broken down. But how can they get broken down? If they get adequate amount of oxygen. So that is the next part that we are going to understand, that the body cells already get a large amount of glucose by the way of nutrition. But this glucose has to be broken down. If we talk about that the glucose provides energy, we always know that the carbohydrate food provides energy. But then now this glucose in the blood cannot be broken down by any further enzyme. We don't have any other enzyme in the blood or in our intestine to break them down further to release energy. But this process can be done with the help of certain cell organelles inside the cell only. But then these cells, now that they have got adequate amount of glucose, they need oxygen for the process of breakdown. And after they receive oxygen, now next what? This has to be broken down to carbon dioxide and water and a whole lot of energy. So that is what we are saying, that carbohydrate food provides us with a lot of energy. So this is a process which is happening in each of these cells, and this is what we are actually talking about, respiration. This is what we are actually talking about as respiration. Then what is the definition of respiration that we write? It is a biochemical process. One of the parts of the definition always to mention, it is a biochemical process in which what is happening? In which the food is getting broken down with the help of oxygen to produce primarily what? To produce primarily carbon dioxide and energy. Of course, water is also a byproduct. But when we are talking about the major products, what are the major products? Carbon dioxide and energy. Energy in the form of what? Energy majorly in the form of heat. Small amount of energy also in the form of heat. First of all, we'll start with the definition. What is respiration? How do we define respiration now? Never ever to write those definitions that we are studying in the lower standard, taking in of oxygen, giving out of air. No, these definitions doesn't work now. You have to write down this particular definition. What is respiration? Write down the biochemical process in which food is broken down. Food within brackets, right? Glucose. Biochemical process in which food is broken down. Within bracket glucose. Glucose is broken down in the presence of oxygen, to give rise to, in the presence of oxygen to give rise to carbon dioxide, water and energy. Carbon dioxide, water and energy. Now, this is the basic definition of respiration, always we understand. Now, I am talking about two environments. I am talking about some aquatic organisms and I am talking about terrestrial organisms. You already know what is the meaning of this. When we are talking about aquatic organisms, examples, fishes, all the different type of organisms in the water. I talk about terrestrial organisms, the land animals. Now, what is the difference now? With reference to respiration, we are going to understand that if it is the aquatic organism, always we understand that the breathing rate, let us just put it this way, the breathing rate is very high. The breathing rate is very high. What about this side? The breathing rate is lesser or comparatively slower. So this is always, whenever we are talking about the concept of respiration, this is one particular concept we try understanding. If it is a terrestrial organism, always we know that we are in a more advantageous situation. Why? As compared to an aquatic organism. How come we are in a more advantageous situation? Because at one particular breath, we can take in a whole lot of oxygen, which an organism in the fish, an organism in the water cannot take. A fish of the same body weight, or a fish of the same or moderate body weight, if I am talking about, that organism also has to breathe a number of times, breathing rate very high. They have to breathe a number of times to take a small amount of oxygen. Why like that? Because the air has more of oxygen as compared to the oxygen dissolved in the water. If I compare, say suppose 1 ml of water and 1 ml of air, volume by volume comparing, I talk about 5 ml of water, 5 ml of air. Where is oxygen more? Always in the air oxygen is more. You already know what is the proportion of oxygen in one volume of air. What is it? 21%. Okay, so if I say that one particular volume of air has much higher amount of oxygen as compared to the same volume of water. So that is always standard. On top of that, if I talk about small animals, say suppose if I am comparing any small terrestrial organism with a moderately same size, same body weight organism in the water, the breathing rate of that organism in the land will be much, much lesser as compared to the breathing rate in the organisms in the water. For example, if I talk about, say suppose a moderate sized fish in the water, and for us, any idea what is our breathing rate? In 1 minute, how many number of times we breathe?
12 to 20.
Close.
25.
24 to 30 times. 24 to 30 times in 1 minute we breathe. What about that fish down there which has got a body weight comparatively same like maybe a child of 5-10 years? What would that be? Much more. 50-55, that is the minimum breathing rate for these group of organisms. So the same size body weight of an organism, the same size, the same weight of an organism. Here if I compare with a small child and a moderate sized fish, the child has a breathing rate of 25 to 30 times and the fish has a breathing rate of something around 50 to 60 times, much more. For us, when we talk about 50 to 60 times breathing rate, it is something considered as a abnormality of the lungs, a condition which is not normal for us. But then why the situation like this? Because at any particular time, whenever we are breathing, at small breath, we can take in a large amount of oxygen. We are spending a lesser amount of energy to take in a large amount of oxygen. But then not for the fish. If you observe, I think some of you have already done, if you observe the fishes in the aquarium also, did you ever observe that the fishes, they have got those operculum, no, those shield-like structures on the sides of the head. and that constantly keeps on moving, no, up and down, up and down, up and down, so many number of times. In a minute, if you check, so many number of times. What are they doing? They're trying to take in a large amount of water, and from that part of the small amount of oxygen that goes into their blood. But for us, what's happening? At one breath, so much of oxygen goes inside our blood, inside our body tissues. So there's a particular question also that you get in the paper, that how are organisms in the, or how are terrestrial organisms in a advantageous condition as compared to aquatic organism? What should you write? You always write that since the breathing rate, something to be compared, the breathing rate for us is comparatively low, so the energy expenditure is much lesser for the amount of oxygen to be taken. This group of organisms, for that small amount of oxygen, they have to take in a huge amount of, they have to spend so much of energy. So that if you have the textbook there, those of you have the textbook, page number 91, there's the first question there. If you see, let us complete that answer first and then we'll move on. What is that question? Those of you have the textbook, you have the textbook in the volume also, that question is there. Anybody having their textbook here? Read out that question there, page 91. Write down the question. Those who don't have the book, I'll read out, I'll dictate, you write. What advantage over an aquatic organism, what advantage over an aquatic organism, what advantage over an aquatic organism does a terrestrial organism have? What advantage over an aquatic organism does a terrestrial organism have? Does a terrestrial organism have? Does the terrestrial organism have with regards to obtaining oxygen, with regards to obtaining oxygen for respiration, with regards to obtaining oxygen for respiration? Answer. Atmospheric air has a higher proportion of oxygen. Atmospheric air has a higher proportion of oxygen as compared to the oxygen dissolved, as compared to oxygen dissolved in the same, as compared to oxygen dissolved in the same volume of water, or in the same amount of water, as compared to oxygen dissolved in the same amount of water. Full stop. Thus, a terrestrial organism can obtain a large amount of oxygen at one breath, and the breathing rate is comparatively lesser compared to an aquatic organism. Breathing rate is comparatively lesser as compared. Breathing rate is comparatively lesser to an aquatic organism. First one. The energy expenditure for an aquatic organism is much more. Energy expenditure for an aquatic organism is much more for a small amount of oxygen taken. For a small amount of oxygen taken. Did you understand what we have written? So here you are comparing that since the air has got more of oxygen, the water has got less of oxygen. So definitely the organism in the water is breathing or taking in a large amount of water, allow the water run through the gills, and from that water, the organism is able to take in a small amount of oxygen. But if I talk about that much of the air the terrestrial organism takes in, the terrestrial organism is actually taking in a huge amount of oxygen at that time. So the terrestrial organism, we are not spending so much of energy to take in a small amount of oxygen. At one breath, large amount of oxygen goes in. Next is, we are going to understand the respiratory processes, structures in human. Now, first of all, we are going to learn the respiratory organs. What are the respiratory organs? To understand the process of respiration, we have to first of all learn what are the organs in the human body and what are the specialized features of the respiratory organs and their functions one after the other. Now we talk about the respiratory organs in human, the human respiratory system, and what are the organs. The organs in a sequence that we understand and the special features. A human respiratory system. What are the organs? The first is we start with the nostrils, then the nasal passage. Here for each of these parts, one specific function, one structural feature, if at all, you'll have to remember. Nasal passage, then we are talking about the pharynx, then we talk about the larynx, then we have the trachea, major part of the respiratory system in human, the trachea followed by the bronchi, and then we talk about the bronchioles, and then the lungs. So as we talk about the structures, let us also talk about the diaphragm. The diaphragm is also a part of the respiratory system. Now when we are talking about what are the parts of the respiratory system, these are the parts of the respiratory system that you have to remember. What are the features and their structures? When we are talking about the nostrils, the position of the nasal passage, this is the nasal passage that we understand. The nasal passage, see here the pharynx. Pharynx is a part, when we were studying the elementary canal also we have named the pharynx there. When we talk about the pharynx, it is the common passage through which the food also will pass and the air also will pass. Always to remember that is a function that you write. Then after that we are talking about the front region of this tube. Now this tube that we are able to sense, remember we are not able to sense the esophagus at all because the esophagus is just at the back of the trachea. So this tube that we can feel is actually the trachea. And up there, this is the larynx that we can feel. So this is the larynx, and then we have got the entire trachea. The trachea divided into a set of tubes, a network of tubes, and this is what we are talking about as the bronchi and the bronchioles. And every single bronchiole entering or ending up terminating into a air sac, and this is what we are talking about as the alveolus. So what are the sequence of structures one after the other and what are their functions? So let us talk about their functions now. Nostrils. Now nostrils are basically the passages that we talk about for inhalation and exhalation both. We are talking about what is the function of the nostrils. Intake of the air, the giving out of the air, that is the basic function. One special structural feature of the nostrils is it has got the ciliated epithelia. Do you remember this? It has got the ciliated epithelia. Do you remember ciliated epithelium? What was the job? Nahin? Movement to some extent and also trapping the dust particles, germs, etc. So now that we are talking about, so we generally understand that the nostrils play an important role in filtering the air that we breathe every time, filtering the air of all the different like of unwanted soot particles, harmful substances, germs, microbes, etc. Nasal passage has got one specific function always to understand. The nasal passage always makes the inhaled air warm and moist. The nasal passage always is known to make the inhaled air warm and moist. It makes the inhaled air warm and moist. So if I talk about that, the nasal passage, now that's the reason whenever we are in an environment where the temperature is much lesser than our body temperature, but we don't suffer from any congestion or mucus formation or cough, cold, etc. If I talk about. Why? Because every time now that we are breathing the cold air or the air cooler than our body, what happens? The nasal passage can warm the air a little bit before it is moving inside. So every time as the air we are breathing is not actually cold but enters inside, it has been a little bit customized here, and the body temperature more or less set, and then the air goes inside. So there is no mucus formation or etc. most of the times. Pharynx now. What we talk about the pharynx? Yes, it is a common passage. What is the pharynx? It's a common passage. These are the functions that I'm writing down. Remember, when you are asked about the function, this is what you are supposed to write down. Pharynx, common passage for food and air. Common passage for food and air. So now, whatever we swallow down moves by the way of the pharynx to enter into the esophagus at the back. So this particular pharynx actually divides into two tubes. One at the back, the esophagus, and one in the front, the trachea, the windpipe. So we are talking about the pharynx, a common passage for food and air. Larynx, you've heard about this already. What is larynx? Voice box. Now that I talk about the larynx as the voice box, what is the relation with respiration valve? It very much helps in the passage of air. It very much helps in the passage of air. Now, larynx, if we say that yes, it's a voice box, it is made up of a cartilaginous box-like structure. See here, it says it is made up of a cartilaginous box, always mentioned this way. But what is there inside this cartilaginous box? There are hundreds of fine thread-like structures. There are hundreds of fine fibers inside. And now that we are taking in the air, every time these fibers are vibrating, and the production of the sound. So here we of course know that the larynx is very much essential for the production of the voice sound. But we have to write out the function related with respiration. So what is the function related to respiration? We write passage of the air, inhaled air, exhaled air. So is it not the larynx also helping in that process? Yes. It is a pathway which helps in the process of movement of the air. Now we talk about the most important parts, the trachea and henceforth. So we talk about the trachea now. What are the features of the trachea? What are the features of the trachea? The trachea is made up of smooth muscles. The trachea is made up of smooth muscles. Now when I say that the trachea is made up of smooth muscles, can you tell me one special feature? Involuntary. Now that these are made up of smooth muscles, these are involuntary, so that means the process of contraction, relaxation as per the need of the body. We cannot control. The trachea is made up of smooth muscles and it has C-shaped cartilaginous rings. It has C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Now that's a special feature for the trachea and the bronchi always. So when I talk about the trachea and the bronchi both, these are also made up of smooth muscles. And does the bronchi also have the C-shaped cartilaginous rings? Yes, partially. This also has the C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Now, whenever we are talking about the C-shaped cartilaginous rings has got a great significance whenever we are talking about the trachea, the bronchi. I talk about this particular tube-like structure, the trachea, and I'm saying that it has got these type of rings all over. This is what we can feel when we run down our fingers here. These are the dents and the depression that we get to see. There are some rings all over, and it has got a great significance. We are going to come to this. But as we now talk about the trachea always bifurcates this way. The trachea will always bifurcate this way to form narrow tubes known as the bronchi. So the trachea bifurcates to form narrow tubes known as the bronchi. But what about the bronchi again? It will keep on bifurcating and dividing constant. So the trachea, the bronchi, now this is what we will call it as the first set of bronchial tubes. This divide into another set. What about this? This will again divide into another set of tubes. So one set and then two, and then from here again another set, and then again from here I will talk about that another set of tubes are formed. So how do you name them? What is this particular tube known as? This is known as the trachea. What is this first set of tubes by the bifurcation of the trachea known as? This is known as the primary bronchi. The primary bronchi. This is the primary set of tubes, the first set of tubes. From the primary bronchi, another set of tubes. So what will we name this? This is known as the secondary bronchi. This is the secondary bronchi. Now, from the secondary bronchi, if you see another set of tubes, then what will we name this as? This is the tertiary bronchi. A network of tubes that generally forms. From the tertiary bronchi, another set of tubes. What are these set of tubes known as? These are known as the bronchioles, and these are the minutest tubes. These are the minutest. A network of tubes are generally formed like this. A network of tubes are generally formed. Now, from these bronchioles, they will always terminate like this. So they would generally terminate like this. So whenever I am talking about this set of tubes, the bronchiole will always terminate like this. And now we talk about the lungs all over. We now talk about the lungs all over. So all this entire structure to talk about, this is this entire structure that we talk about. What is this entire structure now known as? This is now known as the lungs. Where is this? What is the location of the lungs? In the chest cavity. What are these tubes and what are their specific functions? Again, let us talk about. I said the trachea made up of smooth muscles, and that is the same for the bronchi also, and that is the same for the bronchioles also. This is also made up of smooth muscles, all the three. Then, when I talk about the trachea and the bronchi, they have the C-shaped cartilaginous rings which we don't come across in the bronchiole. C-shaped cartilaginous rings are only there majorly in the trachea, partially in the bronchi, not there in the bronchioles at all. What will you write for the function of the trachea and the bronchi? Passage of air. What is the function? Passage of air. What is the function of the bronchioles? Passage of air. But now that we talk about the bronchiole, every single bronchiole terminates as what? As an air sac. Every particular bronchiole will terminate as an air sac. And what is this air sac known as? This is known as the alveolus. How do you define this word? Structural and functional unit of the lungs. Please write it down. What is the definition of alveolus? How do you define this? Where are they present? Every single alveolus will be at the terminal ends of the bronchiole. So if I say that there are millions of bronchioles, millions of alveolus, that also means there are millions of bronchioles also in every particular lung. So now that we are talking about, put that I don't know. So now that we are talking about the bronchioles, what are the two features I mentioned? The minutest tubes, the narrowest tubes of the lungs, the minutest tubes of the lungs, and every single bronchiole will terminate to form a air sac. What are those air sacs called? Lungs, the alveolus. Now that I talk about the lungs, what are some special features of the lungs? The lungs are spongy because of the presence of the alveolus just now we were mentioning. What are these alveolus filled with air? What are these alveolus filled with? They are filled with air, so that makes the lungs spongy. At the same time, the lungs are richly vascularized. The lungs are richly vascularized. What is the meaning of extensive vascularization or richly vascularized? Means they have got large number of blood vessels surrounding. So two features for the lungs I am mentioning. They are spongy structures made up of millions of alveolus. alveolus are structural functional unit of the lungs. Whatever number of alveolus, that many number of bronchiole, always to understand the relation, because every bronchiole will terminate into an air sac. So, what are those special features of the lungs that bring about the process of respiration possible? Now, lungs are the specialized structures that we understand. So, what are those specialized structures of the lungs that bring about the process of respiration possible, exchange of gases possible? Number one, the presence of alveolus and the extensive supply of blood vessels. These 2 points always to write. So what am I saying is that now talk about the trachea, bronchi, bronchioles. If I ask you, right, differences between the trachea and the bronchi structurally. What is the structural difference to write? The trachea is a broader tube. The trachea is a broader tube. The bronchi are narrower. The bronchi are formed by the bifurcation of the trachea. Trachea is the broader tube and this bifurcates to form the bronchi always. C-shaped cartilaginous rings present in both. Now let us try understanding. What is the significance of these rings now? Do they have any major job to perform? They have a major job to perform. Now that I talk about the function of the trachea and the bronchi, what is it? Passage of air. We are inhaling. We are exhaling. Now the forcibly also when you exhale, are we understanding that these tubes will collapse and constrict and almost close down? No, they will never close down. Even if you are breathing forcibly, that time also, these tubes, when I talk about the bronchi and the trachea, they are never closed down, but they always maintain a proper diameter. But how? Because of the rings, the cartilaginous rings will not allow the absolute contraction or the absolute shrinking of the smooth muscular walls. Because the rings are there, and they always give a framework. We've already studied this. We will have, we'll write this answer there. What is the significance of the C-shaped cartilaginous rings? Again, this is a question there to remember. What is the significance of, what is the significance of the C-shaped cartilaginous rings? What is the significance of the C-shaped cartilaginous rings? What is the significance of the C-shaped cartilaginous rings? Write down. The C-shaped rings on the outer wall, C-shaped rings on the outer wall of, C-shaped rings on the outer wall of the C-shaped rings on the outer wall of trachea prevent collapsing of the trachea, prevent collapsing of the trachea, prevent collapsing of the trachea even after forceful exhalation, even after forceful exhalation. Did you understand? Understood this?
Yes.
When we talk about the trachea, can you name any other tubular structure? Already you have studied. Can you name any other tubular structure in our body which is made up of smooth muscles? Alimentary canal. Now talk about the food pipe. The food pipe and the trachea, they are different. The food pipe, as the food runs down, the esophagus constricts to a great extent. As the food runs down, the esophagus will constrict down to a great extent. Does this happen for the trachea? No, the trachea is still wide. The trachea does not constrict. What would happen? Can you tell me? The rings of cartilage would not have been there. If, just now you wrote, the rings of cartilage prevent the trachea from collapsing, even if you are exhaling very, very forcibly. If the rings of cartilage are not there, then formation of vacuum. And what would be the disadvantage you would suffer from? It will collapse. We are exhaling and it is collapsing. Then what is the problem that we are suffering from?
Air passage is blocked.
Dono का entering करता है.
Now then the next breath you take, you have to spend in a whole lot of effort and energy. How many number of times you are inhaling are you able to understand? It's so effortless, no? When you are taking in the air, is it with a great effort? Spending so much of energy? No, we don't even understand how many number of times we are inhaling. Because now that we have exhaled out air, the trachea is more or less maintained in the same diameter. Do we have to put in a great amount of force while swallowing the food? Yes, we need to. For swallowing of the food, we need to apply a greater amount of force as compared to taking in of air. If you take a note, we are swallowing the food, there's a large amount of effort, but for inhaling the air, the effort is almost nil because of the wider diameter of the trachea. So always remember this. We are already written this answer, the significance of the C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Now we talk about the lungs. You get a question, how are lungs designed to carry out the process of exchange of gases? What should you write? How are the lungs designed to carry out the process of exchange of gases? What are the points on which you should write? The lungs are made up of large number of air sacs, which make the entire structure spongy. This particular air sacs again has got some special features. Any part of the respiratory organ. Now we are talking about this entire thing as a respiratory organ, but why not exchange of gases here? There are some reasons. Why not exchange of gases at this particular region? Why exchange of gases down there? Again, there must be some specialized reason. Now, what is the second point I'm saying? How are the lungs designed to bring about the process of exchange of gases? Number one, the lungs are made up of millions of spongy air sacs. Every single air sac again has got some specialized features, and these features are exactly the same what you had studied for the villas. What are the two special features of the villas you have studied?
Thin epithelial.
Thin epithelial wall and rich supply of blood vessels. Same thing here also. Now, you may ask that why the same thing here? There we are talking about absorption and here we are talking about the air. But still, here we are talking about diffusion again. The moment you talk about diffusion, for diffusion inside our body, two things are mandatory. And what are those two things? Thin wall. The surface should always have a thin wall. And the surface should always have a large supply of blood vessels. And that's the reason the villus also we saw the same feature. And here also the alveolus will come across the same feature. Right on this answer. How are the lungs designed to carry out? How are the lungs designed to carry? Why do you leave that space? What did I tell you? How are the lungs designed to carry out the process of exchange of gases? How are the lungs designed to carry out the process of exchange of gases? Answer, the lungs are a pair of spongy structures. Lungs are a pair of spongy structures made up of put a hyphen, put a dash, number one, made up of millions of, made up of, put a hyphen, millions of air sacs known as alveoli. Millions of air sacs known as alveoli. Number two, rich supply of blood vessels. Rich supply of blood vessels. Within bracket you will use this word, vascularized. Rich supply of blood vessels. Within bracket, vascularized. Go to the next paragraph. The alveolus are specialized to carry out. Alveolus are specialized to carry out the exchange of gases are specialized to carry out the exchange of gases because of the presence of a thin wall made up of single layer of epithelial cells, and extensive network of blood vessels. Now, how are the lungs designed? The first thing always to mention, the lungs have got large number of alveolus. Then you have to mention what are the special features of the alveolus. The alveolus are fine membranous sacs. They are in millions. So the process of exchange of gas is possible and the features. Now the last part that we talk about is the diaphragm. What is it? This is a muscular sheet at the base of the lung. Where is this lungs present? In the thoracic cavity, the chest cavity, the thoracic cavity. So location of the lungs also to remember. What is the location of the lungs that you should write? Location of the lungs is the thoracic cavity. Also the chest cavity that we understand. Now, the chest cavity is the location and this lungs remain protected by the bony structure. Which bony structure protects the lungs? The bony structure that protects the lungs are the ribs. Protected by the ribs again to remember. And the ribs also very much help in the process of breathing. We are going to come next. And now when we are talking about the diaphragm, let us talk about the diaphragm. One or two features of the diaphragm to remember. Diaphragm is a muscular sheet. Again, smooth muscles we are talking about. The diaphragm is made up of muscles. It is also made up of smooth muscles. Remember this feature. It is made up of smooth muscles. This diaphragm can contract, relax from time to time whenever we are talking about the process of breathing. Now, normally, how is the diaphragm? When we are inhaling and when we are exhaling, between inhalation and exhalation, there's a minute gap. At that time, how is the diaphragm? Slightly curved. Now that we try inhaling, now that we are inhaling, what's happening? The diaphragm will become flat. Now that we are exhaling, what next? The diaphragm becomes curved. So the diaphragm is extensively curved when we are talking about exhalation and extremely flattened when we talk about inhalation. Between the two phases, it is slightly curved. So talking about all these parts and their functions, now we have to understand the process of respiration. What is the process of respiration? Anything doubtful here? Basic parts to remember are the trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, lungs, diaphragm. These are the major parts on which you get questions, labeling, parts in the diagram, diagram-based questions. Larynx, pharynx also sometimes you are asked differences. If I talk about what is the difference, you can write larynx and pharynx. 1 point of difference, what can you write? Pharynx allows both the passage of air and food, and larynx would allow only the passage of air. So only that much to write down. Structurally, what difference? Larynx is a cartilaginous structure, cartilaginous box. Whereas when I talk about the pharynx, it is just a tube made up of smooth muscles. Remember, this is also a tube. It is muscular in origin. It is also made up of smooth muscles. And it is a muscular, wider tube. It is a wider tube, not like the trachea. It's a much wider space. So these are some of the features that you'll have to remember. Now we talk about the process of respiration. To understand respiration now, we have to talk about respiration in phases. What are the phases we are going to understand for respiration? The phases that we are going to understand would be breathing. Next is we talk about gaseous exchange. One is breathing, one is gaseous exchange. Next is we talk about tissue respiration. Next is tissue respiration, and after that we talk about cellular respiration. After that we talk about cellular respiration. Now we study respiration in this particular method in 4 phases. We try understanding what is respiration. Breathing, you already know what do we understand by breathing. Can you define what is breathing?
Inhalation of oxygen.
Inhalation of
Oxygen.
oxygen. कहाँ पे filter कहाँ पे है? Oxygen खाली जाएगा अंदर. Inhalation of air. Not to write oxygen at all. Inhalation of air. But now remember, when we talk about, yes, in the earlier standards we have studied also this way, inhalation of oxygen, giving out of carbon dioxide, but now you will not write that as an answer. Inhalation of air, we are always inhaling air. What is the problem there? Spider is there, cockroach is there. Huh? Then what is the problem? He's the cockroach. I'm asking you, you're always saying he, and he. What happened?
Disturbing.
Disturbing. I know that should be disturbing on this. He's coming to the class with a serious face, but always he's mischievous. I did your studies properly. With this face, you are getting that serious look. Look तो serious हो गया, पढ़ाई हो रहा है कि नहीं हो रहा? And then no change. What you were last year till now also you are the same. Now, next part we are going to talk about, what I was saying is that when we talk about the process of breathing, what is the definition that we write now? Definition of breathing, process of intake of air and giving out of air. So which are the parts involved? Intake of air, giving out of air. Intake of air means the air moving through these passages fills in the alveolus. From here again come back, release out. Is there any change happening in the, or is there any new compounds formed, glucose breaking down, anything is happening? When I talk about breathing, it is absolutely a physical process. Air going in, filling in the lungs, air coming out from the lungs. No chemical changes happening in the body, always to remember. Which are the parts involved in the process of breathing? Right from the nostrils till the alveolus, all the parts that we have come across just now. For the process of breathing, all the parts are involved, but only to remember, breathing is absolutely a physical process. No chemical breakdown, no nothing, no change chemically is happening in the body. But when we are talking about the process of breathing, breathing will have 2 phases. It's empty. Now, when we are talking about inhalation and exhalation, what are the 2 phases? We are going to study them in 2 phases. First of all, I'll give you a set of phases, set of events for inhalation, and if you understand, you should be able to write for exhalation also. Now, let us try understanding this. Inhalation, the first phase of breathing. What I told you, breathing means the process of taking in of air and giving out of air. But again, you may ask that what happens to the rest of the gases? Then we are very much inhaling sulfur compounds also, nitrogenous compounds also. Then what is happening to that? Why are we always talking about carbon dioxide and oxygen only? Because inside our body, in our blood, there is no specific pigment or enzyme or a protein which can take the nitrogen or the sulfur from our lungs inside. The pigments and the proteins of the blood can only take either oxygen or carbon dioxide, can bind with only carbon dioxide or oxygen. So that's the reason we are definitely breathing in, we are definitely taking in a whole lot of sulfur compounds also, carbon monoxide also, and various other different type of components for the air. But now that it goes inside and fills in the lungs, in the next breath it will come out also. It does not enter into the deeper parts. No bond formation, no compound formation, nothing. So that's the reason whenever we are talking about exchange of gases, we are only talking about oxygen and carbon dioxide. So the first phase of breathing is inhalation. Now try understanding with this figure also. When I talk about inhalation, you see here that this particular yes. Now, when we are talking about the concept of inhalation and exhalation, try understanding. This is the diaphragm, and these are the ribs surrounding the lungs. Okay, try understanding 4 stages I'm going to talk about. Now, these are the ribs. The ribs on the inner wall has got some muscles. Can the bones move on their own? They need what? Muscles. I talk about the hands and the legs and the face, made up of bones, but the bones are attached to muscles. The muscles are contracting, and that's the reason the parts of the body move. If there was no muscle, then movement would not have been possible. The bones alone cannot move. So now, same thing here. I talk about the ribs. The ribs on the inner wall has got some muscles. Those muscles are contracting. Now that those muscles are contracting, what is happening to these ribs? The entire rib cage is moving little bit forward. The rib cage moves forward. What is? The entire rib cage is moving forward and upward. Both the things. The entire rib cage moves forward and upward. When you take a deep breath, if you analyze, you can feel that it happens. Whenever we are taking a deep breath, we are inhaling. Every time, our rib cage is moving little bit forward and moving upward. If that is true, is this space increasing? Follow. All of you look at the diagram, all of you look at the image, otherwise you will not follow what I am speaking. If that is true, that the rib cage is moving forward and upward, is this space increasing? Horizontal space of the chest cavity increasing? No? I'll tell you again. What am I saying? That this is the rib cage. Inside that space of, inside the space or the inner space of the ribs, that is what I talk about as the chest cavity. Okay. Now I'm saying that this entire set of ribs, how many ribs are there? 12 ribs are there. Now this entire rib cage has got muscles inside and the muscles are contracting. As these muscles contract, the entire rib cage is moving forward little bit, and also upward. So if it is moving forward, is not this space increasing?
Yes.
Horizontal space of the chest cavity increasing. And just by that time, but just simultaneously, what now next? This diaphragm, I already told you, the diaphragm is now little bit curved. Now as this ribs start moving, the diaphragm starts becoming flat. So the diaphragm becoming flat, is not this space also increasing? If the diaphragm was like this little bit and the diaphragm is moving and becoming flat, vertical space increase hoga ki nahi hoga? Hoga. So what are the two things happening? One by one. The two things that are happening. Number one, the rib cage moving forward and upward. Horizontal space increasing. The diaphragm is exactly at the base of the lungs. The diaphragm, which was a little bit curved, now becomes flat. So the vertical space also increases of the chest cavity. This is allowing adequate amount of air from the atmosphere to rush inside and fill inside the lungs. Which process am I talking about? Inhalation. Now that the lungs are filled in, what will we call these lungs as? Inflated. Inflate. You know the word inflation. Inflated. What is the meaning of inflated? Lungs are filled with air. Did you understand this? What I spoke just now? The ribs are moving forward and upward. The diaphragm contracts and becomes flat. The space of the chest cavity both ways increasing, so the air can easily rush in. Now, why am I saying the air can easily rush in? Because here the air is less. Exactly. Here the air is more. Air is moving from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. Again, we are talking about nothing but diffusion. So, जैसे ही space बढ़ेगा, फटाफट air अंदर चला जाएगा. That's a basic concept. अभी now the lungs can hold on the air only for a short period of time. तो अब जो भी exchange होना है in that few seconds it can happen. And now after few seconds, what's happening? ये जो diaphragm है, it starts becoming curved. It starts becoming curved, and The rib cage was here. A rib cage coming backward and downward. तो पहले inhalation के टाइम पे rib cage यहाँ तक आ गया था. Can you see these dotted lines? All of you.
Yes, yes.
ये जो dotted lines है, what are they expressing with those dotted lines? What they want to explain with this? The dotted lines means before in the previous phase inhalation में the the rib cage was here, and now just within few seconds the rib cage again going backward and downward, meaning the original position again. Diaphragm flat था, now the diaphragm is becoming curved. So जैसे ही ये पीछे जाएगा and ये ऐसे वापस curved हो जाएगा, is this space decreasing? The chest cavity space decreasing. तो ये जैसे decrease हो रहा है, the lungs are again squeezed and the forcing out of air can easily happen. What is this forcing out of the air known as? Exhalation. How many of you did not understand? Tell me right now, because steps तुमको खुद को लिखना है. Any doubt anybody has? What are the steps again? I will give you, don't write. I will give you all the 4 steps. You will have to understand and write. What are the steps I told you? Number 1, rib cage. Understood about the rib cage? Diaphragm, chest cavity, and then 4th point is about the lungs. Now the lungs when filled with air, I will say the lungs are inflated. अब जब constrict हो गया उसको बोलेंगे deflated. Deflate. आया समझ में? We will write now those points. So what is the first one? The ribs move outward and upward. Outward and upward. Next what? Diaphragm contracts. Diaphragm contracts and flattens. Diaphragm contracts and flattens. Space of the chest cavity increases. Next word, lungs are filled with air. What do we call this as? Lungs are inflated. Check out if it is understood. If not understood, you'll have to tell me. If this is understood, then you know exhalation what to write. आया समझ में ना? Anybody who is not clear, पहले ये complete करो, then I'll ask you. Diaphragm. Diaphragm क्या हो रहा है? Normally diaphragm समझो ऐसे रहेगा. The diaphragm is here. अब जब diaphragm ऐसा है, normally है. Now inhalation के नाम पे क्या हो रहा है? The diaphragm is becoming flat. तो flat होते the vertical space will increase, no? So this will favor the air to rush in and fill in क्योंकि space ज़्यादा है अभी. But after few seconds ये diaphragm फिर से relax होके ऐसे curved हो जाता है. It will become curved. Now that it is curved, the space is decreasing. छोटा हो गया space. अब जब छोटा हो गया, the lungs are under tension, pressed हो गया. Exhalation will happen. Clear? अब चलो, अब बोलो. If now for exhalation you have to write. All of you will write exhalation also separately. Don't bother for the break. I'll give you 2 minutes extra, not to worry. Now, complete करो ये. Exhalation, all of you will write down the steps. Exhalation में changes क्या लिखना है बता? Ribs move inward and downwards. Diaphragm relaxes and becomes curved. Becomes curved. Space of the chest cavity decreases. Lungs are emptied of air and they are deflated now. Constricted भी लिख सकते हैं, that's the same thing. Deflated or constricted. So this is what for breathing. Now the concept of gaseous exchange, tissue respiration, cellular respiration will all come in a sequence. So breathing के बाद, what is the situation? The alveolus are filled with air. Every single alveolus filled with air. Or exhalation के बाद, what is the situation? The alveolus are emptied of air, we write, but remember, it's not that every single alveolus absolutely emptied of air. No, almost about 500 ml of air. 500 ml of air is a quite good amount. 500 ml of air still रहता है inside the alveolus. So though we say the lungs are constricted and deflated, not to understand that the lungs are absolutely emptied of air, because the process of gaseous exchange continuously goes on inside the body. So it is never like that in our lungs, in our body, that the lungs are absolutely emptied of air. That never happens. We have completed till here. After the break, we'll continue with all this and some events of respiration to study. We just leave it as is.
रुकना भाई, मेरे को जाना है, लेकिन नहीं तो नहीं करना है, बोलो ना भाई, छोड़ना है मेरे पैर से तक नीचे चल दुनिया ना हम जाते नहीं